Well, welcome to the panel called The Art of Fashion. And I'm really excited to be up here with some of the most influential people working in the fashion business today and have made impact on the world as we speak, and also several years ago as well. So we have a lot of talent and expertise and ingenuity and innovation all up here on the table. So I'm going to introduce everybody here because the one thing that's really exciting about this is that we have people from all different facets of the fashion industry. We have Stephen Allen. Stephen Allen, he's a designer and he's an entrepreneur. He has his own line. He has several stores. How many stores do you have today?
Wow.
Yeah, all over the country.
I remember when it was just a showroom.
Yeah. So we have a designer and we have an entrepreneur all in the same person. And also a business manager as well, because you manage a lot of people who run your stores. And in case you don't know what Stephen Allen clothing is, he's actually wearing it. Yeah, always it. Okay. Then we have Deborah Needleman. And Deborah Needleman is in the world of, I would say, journalism, publishing. She was the founding editor-in-chief of Domino magazine, which won several awards. And now she is the editor-in-chief at T, the New York Times.
Style magazine? Is that what it says?
Yeah, that's why I'm like, what story?
What's that?
I'm like, that. Well, what story? Because you're a Wall Street Journal, right?
No,
I
she
switched
left.
jobs about 3 weeks ago.
You missed,
Oh,
you missed the drama.
oh my God.
It went on and
Okay.
on and on and
So
on
now
and
you're a
on.
Wall Street Journal.
No, so
No.
now I'm at the New York Times.
Got
I
it.
was at the Wall Street Journal last month.
Okay, see how the world of journalism is changing so much as we learned in the last panel? Okay, and next to Deborah, we have Mary McFadden, who is not only a designer,
An icon.
An icon. Okay, good. We'll say that. I like the word you call yourself also, like a fashion archaeologist, you told me before. Do you still use that term?
No.
Okay, well, she's not that anymore. But she was also in the world of media by working at Vogue. She was the president of the Council of Fashion Designers of America, of the CFDA. And she has had collections have been shown on runways in New York, Paris, Rome, Milan, and Tokyo. So as Anne has said, Mary McFadden is characterized as a fashion icon from most people in the industry and beyond. Yes, and then we have Anne Slowey. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
You're also in the world of media as well.
I am.
And you worked in magazines.
Forever.
Right, and you've been on TV.
I have.
Yes. Why don't you tell everybody what you've been on?
Well, let's see. I was on the first and second season of Project Runway as a judge, and then I want to say I got cast because there's no reality in reality TV. I want to tell you that. And then I was on playing not myself, but a very hyper inflated version of myself, a parody on Stylista, which was on the CW. And then I don't know. I've done a bunch of other TV stuff, but I'm the fashion news director at Elle magazine, and I've worked there for 15 years. Before that, I was at W for 4 years, and before that, I was at Vogue, which is when I met Mary for the first time. And yeah, I'm dating myself now. But anyway, I cover the shows, and I come up with features and story ideas to try to like explain the trends to people in sort of a fun and culturally relevant way. That's what I do.
Wow, we're lucky to be here with all these amazing icons. And two things that I could say from just listening to what, what's been written, what's been said, and how I introduced everybody, is that fashion is such a big industry. It's such a big profession. And you could be a designer, you could be an artist, you could be a journalist, you could be an actor, so to speak.
Yeah,
You could do so many different things. So just because you're going to choose a career in fashion, that doesn't mean you have to be what you probably thought fashion would be, which is to just design and sell clothes. It's such a big industry. People do the fashion shows. It's so exciting. So since we're on the subject of excitement, why don't we start with you,
Okay.
Anne, on what do you think is the most exciting part of being part of the fashion industry?
I would have to say the shows, and although after doing it for almost 20 years, that's a little bit exhausting, but it's still, when you get a great show, there's nothing like it, It's, you want to cry, you want to scream, And it's rare. It's very rare. I mean, there's maybe 5 visionaries in this entire industry, which is just turned into a huge corporate conglomerate. It's a massive industry, not like it was when I met. It was a very small, rarefied world. This next most exciting thing for me is to meet new designers as they're getting going with their businesses, and to see them develop over years, and to see them actualize their hopes and their dreams. And then I guess the next most exciting thing is like going to a party with Karl Lagerfeld. And that happens over and over and over again each
It's
season.
never happened to me.
Oh, well, it will. Just wait. But I would sum those up in a nutshell.
Okay, well, it was interesting that you just said about Steven's business that you just knew him when he just had a showroom.
Yeah.
So let's turn the conversation over to Steven. What does it mean to be a designer in this business? And in the most succinct way, can you talk about what the process was like from going from just having a showroom to, I don't know how many years later, having 15 stores all around the country and moving on?
Well, we did the store first, actually. We had a little store, I don't know if you remember, in Soho on Wooster Street. So the whole process for me was kind of backwards. And most people think that we started designing and then we started opening stores and stuff like that. But actually, in the beginning, we started as just a small 400 square foot store on Wooster Street. And we built up a reputation of finding these new designers, and so that's kind of how we started. And what was the other part?
What was it like to go from there to now, the process?
So it was a long. It was
Yeah,
an
why don't you
18
kind of
year-
briefly
it was
tell
an
us the
18-year
steps?
process. So everything was kind of a trial and error, and it was like, does this work? Does this not work? And then once I made a decision, then you kind of like. You just sort of look at whether it was successful or not successful. And I think that when I think back, it was just, there was a lot of not successful things, and there was successful things. And one of the earliest things that I remember was, so starting out as a multi-brand store, in the beginning I knew about accessories. I didn't know anything about clothing. And when I say I didn't know anything about clothing, I would go on market appointments, and they would say, "Oh, this is cut on the bias. This is A-line," and I would just kind of write it down in my little book, and then I'd call a friend of mine at the end of the day. I was like, "So what is A-line? What does this mean, bias?" Like, that's how little I knew about clothing. And so when we used to get written up in magazines, and they would say, "Oh, it has great accessories and great jewelry," and they would never mention the clothing. And the clothing was just kind of like, I did what you do. I went to trade shows and I bought stuff for the store, and what we had was really not that different from what you could find in other stores. And it wasn't until I realized that what I really liked about it was discovering designers. And like what you said about those market appointments, and finding someone that's not known, and then being able to promote that designer. That was definitely a big spark. And then New York Magazine wrote an article about the store in '98 as kind of like the place to find new designers. And we had all these stores coming in a sense, just shopping the store. And they were just writing down labels. And for me as a business owner, it was very frustrating because, a lot of time was spent going out there and finding all these things. And then I wasn't able to really capitalize on it because, other people were selling it, and it wasn't even good. It wasn't that it was good for the designer. It wasn't even good for the designer because then, their image got watered down. And so one of the designers had said to me at that point, well, why don't you represent us? Why don't you handle our sales? Because we don't know who to sell to and who not to sell to. And at the time, there really wasn't a network for small designers. I mean, all the showrooms that I knew of that I was going to were really interested only in taking on a designer that had already reached a certain level of sales, and so there was a huge amount of people that weren't at that level, and we started doing that. And I'm trying to make this more succinct because otherwise I'll start going into a whole life story. But so did that, and then what happened was the store was 500 feet. The upstairs part of the store was about 150 feet maybe, and that was our showroom. And we had, people like Isetan from Japan coming up there, and there was a rule that they had to just sit down immediately. Like they couldn't actually stand because there wasn't enough space. And whoever was managing the store would go upstairs and show the line and then come back downstairs. And then eventually the next phase was I moved my apartment to this second floor space in Soho, and I lived in the back, and we had the showroom in the front, and I had a dog at the time, and I remember like big editors coming in, and I don't know if you remember that big American bulldog. And so anyway, we did that, and at each step though, having a conversation with my accountant, and the accountant saying, look, you finally got the retail thing going, what are you doing with the showroom? Because essentially the profits from the store were going to supplement the showroom. Instead of opening up more stores, we were basically just supporting the showroom. And they said, he's like, you should just close that down and open up, and there was other retailers that had opened up a couple years after us that had already had like 7 or 8 stores, and and I really believed in, if I could just tweak that, if I can get the showroom piece running, then it would be such a tremendous benefit to me as a retailer. And so eventually we did. And then as far as designing goes, I just had an empty space upstairs, and I started making things for the store. And after a while, other stores wanted to carry it, which to me was strange, because I just didn't view myself as a designer. I never studied design, and I just thought, I'm making, it's like private label almost. But yeah, and I was making things that other stores wanted to carry, which to me was just strange, because I wouldn't, carry another multi-brand store, in my, and so there was a lot of hurdles, and each thing was something where there was definitely like, it was not only a learning experience, but it was a very costly thing to pursue. But I had this vision that if we could design, represent, and also sell in our stores, it would really be something special, and it wouldn't be something that was just like,
Well, you can all see that, being an entrepreneur, especially in this space, takes a lot of patience, takes a lot of experimentation, and it seems like you don't really know exactly where your business is going to go, so you have to be open-minded and curious. But since we're on the subject of what is a designer and the fact that you never really thought of yourself as a designer, I want to move the conversation over to Mary. So Mary, you're somebody who has been trained or no?
No,
What is your origin story?
I don't know why I'm helping you. I don't know how to do it.
It is not the case at all. I fell into fashion by mistake. I was always a political journalist in Africa, and I got there because my first husband was a director of De Beers Diamonds. And so I became editor of Vogue South Africa, and then a political reporter for the Rant Daily Mail. And then, of course, I was given a one-way exit out of the country because the Rant Daily Mail was an anti-government newspaper, and I was the beginning of the writings on the prison crisis, which eventually which is the whole story of Nelson Mandela. So what happened is I was then given a one-way passport out of South Africa, and I went up to Zimbabwe. And I married the director of the National Gallery of Zimbabwe. And I bought 100,000 acres of an entire Grand Canyon next to Cecil Rhodes's great property and park for $20,000 payable over 20 years. So I
What year was this?
This is the year 1967. And at that time, I had also invested in another business. I bought a huge tobacco farm that was 1,000 acres. And then before I knew it, I didn't have the proper water rights. And so what happened is I sold that property to the Atomic Development Organization of South Africa, and that's how I first made my money. But then I was thrown out of Zimbabwe because Mr. Mugabe had seized my huge property, but I had been able to sell it to Bill Burdick Coots of the Coots Bank, and I made another huge profit and got out with the sculpture. So then I came back to America, still have no interest whatsoever in fashion. But I had made some clothes on my trips. I've been to Madagascar, and my paper had sent me all over Africa. So in the marketplaces, I had bought some of the most beautiful textiles. And the Africans are very simple people. They know how to sew in straight lines. They can make a toga and a tunic and a pair of pants. So I had 3 patterns, a toga, a tunic, and a pair of pants, and the most beautiful fabrics. So I made these tunics and pants and so forth. And when I came back to America, I became editor of American Vogue. And I wore these clothes to work. And they said, well, let's photograph Mary in these clothes for 5 pages in Vogue. So I was doing a story on Geraldine Stutz, then, who's the president of Henry Bendel. And I
Tell
said
everybody
to
who
her,
Henry Bendel is.
Oh,
What?
best store in the world.
Okay,
So-
good. That's all we need to know. Keep
so,
going.
okay.
It doesn't exist anymore.
Doesn't exist. And at any rate, so I took the clothes over, and Geraldine Stutz said to me, I will give you a press show in September 1. So I told her, I don't know how to make these clothes, so please give me a technician. So she gave me the name of a man who was running Bendel's studio. His name was Mitsu. He was a Japanese technician. And I said to him, look, I've got these 3 samples. I don't know how to make clothes, but you must make them for me because we have a press show, September 1. So September 1 came. We made them in a little tiny basement with 1 sink, which I used to stand up on a stool and look at myself in the mirror, and one seamstress. And I had these beautiful textiles, of course. And so I took them on September 1, which was my delivery date, to Geraldine Stutz. And I put them out on the floor, so it looked like a fantastic carpet. And she said to me, Mary, I'm going to give you a national press show. And out of that, I sold $1 million worth of merchandise. And I made a career change.
Awesome. Well, I definitely wanted to, that's great. It's a great story. That's an amazing story. I want to get going on the topic of commerce and fashion in a bit, but before we do that, I want to talk to Deborah or ask her this question. That's an amazing story, right?
Amazing.
And your job is to encapsulate and publish stories about interesting people doing interesting things in this interesting world. But what are the components of a really good story? Like we just heard Mary's, which is global, it's entrepreneurial,
Right.
it's serendipitous. What makes a really good story for you to put in a fashion
The
magazine?
amazing thing about journalism is that it sort of lets you go into all these different worlds and to meet all these different kinds of people. And so I've used my career, if I can even call it that, just in terms of following things that I find really interesting. And I've been involved in, I started a decorating magazine. I didn't really know about decorating. I was super interested in decorating. I became a garden writer because I really wanted to learn about gardens and see gardens. And then I've sort of entered the fashion world in a similar way. And I think what attracts me and what I sort of look for is that all these worlds are so fascinating. The fashion industry, any kind of industry is terribly fascinating because there's the characters, there's the business part of it, there's the personalities, the product, the creativity. And to me, what's really interesting is kind of staying a little bit on the outside of all these worlds so that you can see them the way a regular person sees them, although you have a bit more access, and the access is what's fascinating. But to me, the idea is to look at all these things culturally. So when you see, you know, a story like Mary's, it's amazing on a personal level because so much of it is accident, is following what interests you and you see where that leads. And I think most successful careers, I think, develop that way, a combination of luck and accident and really being open and curious to things. And in shaping a story, what's always nice is if you can kind of put all these layers into things. So if I were going to do a story on Mary's, you know, life, what's really interesting is the political context that she was in, the social context, what the role of, you know, a sort of woman as a designer at that time, and trying to sort of not just tell a simple story, but to layer it as much as possible with all the different influences that allow something, you know, to happen. I mean, part of it is, you know, just Mary marrying who she married, you know, ended up having an influence on her career. So all that just really layers is really the thing.
And also serendipity and the fact that you have to follow your interests. Everybody
Yeah.
here has been basically following their interests. So, curious, Anne, was it always a goal for you to be on television?
No, it wasn't. But
So another serendipitous
But it was never even
situation.
my goal to be in fashion. I mean, I fell into it as well. I actually wanted to be in film, but I didn't want to live in LA. So I moved to New York, which was like not very smart. But I found
I think
a
you made the better
career-
decision.
I know. I found a career that I actually think I probably love even more. I did work on some random films with Iranian directors and things, but the 80s were a time when people dressed wildly and individually, and the only reason I got a job at Vogue, I think, is because I didn't know anyone. I had no connections whatsoever. I went and applied through Human Resources, never even got a phone call. I don't know whether my typing wasn't up to speed. It was probably my lack of a social pedigree. They definitely turned the other eye. But I definitely had a flair for dressing wildly, as everyone did in those days. And I went out every night. And I got noticed that way and met an editor at Vogue who, when she had a opening, Andrea Robinson, hired me, and I was her market editor in the beauty department, but I essentially functioned as her stylist assistant. So I went, you know, from being the kid from Indiana who knew no one and couldn't get in anybody's door, like I couldn't get anybody to call me back to work in a magazine, to basically working in Irving Penn's studio with Christy, Linda, Cindy, you know, when all the I mean, it was like, granted, I was peeling off, you know, Christy Turlington's pantyhose when she was standing there nude and looking at myself in the mirror holding the rumpled pantyhose going, I really haven't got what it takes, you know, because this woman was just so beautiful. But, you know, that led to, you know, meeting everyone, and I decided at one point that working on the styling side wasn't for me and that I wanted to be a writer. And so then when I went to W, I started writing, and TV was not a part of the fashion industry then at all. It was a very, very small world. I mean, I guess it all exploded maybe like 10 years ago when people started taking an interest in the industry of fashion, and then we all started getting booked on the morning shows. And
What looks good, what looks, you know,
yeah,
thumbs
but
up.
having a personality, and you kind of had to have a personality to survive those years in the 80s and the 90s in a very cutthroat, brutal business. Like if you couldn't hold your own, you were, you know, as Heidi likes to say, auf Wiedersehen, you were out. But fortunately, it's become a business where it's much more democratic, as you can see from social media. You know, bloggers have made a huge business for themselves just on speaking their own mind about what they like. This idea of like elitism and hierarchy and editors like myself dictating, which was a very Vogue thing to do, has kind of become more about like, you know, like what Deborah was saying, you know, it's really not about, especially at Elle, like telling anybody who they are, what they should be. It's just me exciting you in a way that helps you discover something about yourself. So it's become a much more, as it's gotten bigger, it's become much more democratic. And the demographic is much more interesting. So as we started doing TV shows, and as really it was all about celebrities, you know, when Tom Ford and Gianni Versace started dressing celebrities, that's when the fashion editor became of interest to the TV shows, because we had met people, we were helping dress these people, we were breaking the news on the relationship between the designers and the stars, and then cable cable TV came onto the scene, and suddenly there were endless hours and hours and hours and hours of programming that needed to be filled by endless, very cheap and affordable reality TV shows. And that all happened like 10 years ago. So they came into when Stylista and Ken Mock, who was Heidi, oh God, I'm sorry, what top model? Hello, the model. I just had a baby, so I'm a little out of it. No.
Yes.
Thank you, Tyra. I don't know why they wanted to produce this show on the CW. It would have done much better on Bravo. And believe me, for every story, there's a backstory, because we had done Project Runway with Bravo, and then we signed this deal with CW, and they were like furious with us for not doing it. And the show actually probably would have lived had a life on Bravo versus national primetime. But they came in and they met with everybody, and I was out. I don't know what I was doing. I was on one of these trips, because I used to do all these trips where I would go to like South Africa or Iceland or India and write about fashion in a way that I thought was compelling with designers. And they were literally on their way to the airport, and Josie said, "You got to meet Anne."
Josie is the creative director of
Yeah, and Joe and I had worked together. I've known Joe for like 17 years. We'd worked together
He's
at
on
W.
TV too, right?
Well, he has his own show now, All on the Line. Well, anyway, we'd worked together at W and kind of grew up in the industry together. So we'd done a lot of things we're proud and maybe not so proud of. But so he said, "You got to meet Anne." And so literally their car was going to the airport. My car was coming in from the airport. We met for a coffee. And
there it is.
And boom.
Well, you talked about social media, and you guys probably know more about social media than any of us do. So we are hearing about jobs that people have had, whether it's being an editor, being a writer, being an entrepreneur, being a designer. Stephen, what are the jobs of the future in fashion? So if people are interested in the field, what would you recommend or advise them to be skilled at? So that's two questions.
Well, I
What
think-
kind of
I
skills
mean,
should
to
they
me, the
develop, and what
jobs-
kind of
The
jobs?
jobs are kind of the same. There's designers, technical designers, production people in sample development, production development. From a social media standpoint, there's definitely, like, we have someone that just does our social media, and then we have another person that works with different like affiliate marketing and search engine optimization and stuff like that, which is, that's kind of new.
Do you guys know what that is,
That's
search engine optimization? You want to explain?
so, yeah, I don't work directly on it, so my explanation will be kind of rudimentary, but essentially it's when you go to Google and you just type in, men's shirts, you want to come up at the top of the list. You don't want to be, so there's different things that you can do. So the people that are really good at it, they know what people tend to type in. So it might be like New York stores for boots or whatever, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, you should read this book, How to Outsmart Google. Very, very
Yeah,
good.
I think actually it's knowing the terminology. It's not as difficult as you would think, although I'm flummoxed by most of it when somebody starts talking about metrics and things. But actually knowing how to speak that language of social media and crowdsourcing and metrics and all these things, which really is sort of, we're dating ourselves, but it's not the world I grew up in. Very important that you get that down. It's not complicated. You just need to know the language, because that's how everybody talks about everything now, crowdsourcing.
Well,
know.
yeah, and also what you were just saying, the data, getting information from online. So, Deborah, your, skill set and your success is based on intuition, based on gut, based on thinking and knowing who are the most interesting people who are doing the most interesting work. Everybody's talking about data right now, and that is a future job for everybody. It's the sexiest job.
Absolutely.
The sexiest job of the 21st century in the Harvard Business Review is the data scientist. So is data influencing how you're thinking?
It's interesting because it obviously, is this working? Yeah. It obviously is huge, and being editor of a print magazine is a bit of a dinosaur-y kind of thing to do. And yet, I still completely believe in the role of an editor and a good editor, which is really driven by gut and by not by looking at the data. I mean, it's this sort of Steve Jobs thing. The data can only tell you so much. It can't tell you, how to really surprise and excite a customer, a consumer, a reader. No one can tell you the thing that they haven't gotten yet, and that's the thing as a designer and an editor and a journalist that you want to give to the reader. Is something that they didn't even know that they wanted. So my whole career is about intuition and gut, and what I try and do in building a team is building people around me whose intuition and gut I trust, so that it's really us, and it's not this old Vogue thing of dictating, or the old sort of Martha Stewart thing of you should do this, here's what everybody's wearing, here's what you ought to wear, here's how you ought to decorate. But exactly what Anne said, but of supplying this incredible, surprising, delightful information to people and shaping it in a way that they wouldn't expect.
So basically, you're saying that fashion is art, in a way, and being a journalist is art. If you're going with your gut and you're going with your what inspires you and following your interests, that's really about art as opposed to quote-unquote science, whereas reading data and responding to the data would just be entirely scientific. I mean, we could talk.
I guess yes. I mean, when I worked at Condé Nast, that we did a lot of kind of.
You know what that is, Condé Nast? Condé
So
Nast
that's
is
a
a
big
big
magazine
publishing
company,
yeah.
and that was
Vogue, Vanity Fair, New Yorker,
And Glamour, which is the biggest magazine
Glamour,
out there.
Teen
so
Vogue.
that's a big magazine company, and a big part. The two jobs that I've had recently at the Wall Street Journal magazine and at T. These magazines just come to people in their newspaper, so you don't have to worry about appealing to somebody on a newsstand, which is the big kind of business metric, or one of them with most magazines. So we would do a lot of kind of consumer testing of the magazine to see sort of what things people were interested in. And I think it's useful. This data is useful, but it is not the be-all and end-all. And if you're just a slave to the data, you're not going to create anything interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it comes more into play on the marketing side of publishing when, you have things called added value, and an advertiser, they might want a story from an editorial side, but then they might want an event or some sort of online
Well, yeah, why don't you
editorial.
tell all the young leaders in the audience what the difference between editorial and publishing, maybe. Explain the different parts of a fashion magazine. You guys have all seen The Devil Wears
Yeah.
Prada, right? Of course, right?
well,
It's I mean, I think
yeah.
of it as a documentary.
Marketing is an arm. Yeah. Marketing is an arm of the advertising side of business, and Deborah and I work on the editorial side of business. So it's supposed to be church and state. It's becoming less so as you have, and everybody does have an online division that represents edit.
And it's harder to get advertising money, too.
And
Yeah.
it's become much more competitive and much more cutthroat. And, but basically, it used to be church and state, and it is no longer.
Basically, the editors spend the money, and then the publishing advertising side is supposed to make the money.
Yeah,
Right.
but we spend it less and less, and we're more and more creative about coming up with ways to do great stories without taking these great trips that I used to take. I mean, I don't know anyone that'll ever have the opportunity to do that again, to get on a plane and go beyond the North Pole to meet an 80-year-old woman. I mean, I literally, a plane, a train, and a dog sled to get there. To find the little lady who's the last person on the planet making her own pewter bead. I mean,
Right.
that's the kind of stories I used to do. Now I'm doing stories about, celebrities at Cannes, the film festival, trying to make that interesting, which it isn't necessarily. But then the added value would be like the dinner that Elle would sponsor that would have all these celebrities there.
Influencers.
Yeah,
Yeah,
game
yeah.
changers.
Well, what do you
whatever.
think of that, Mary? Since you're somebody who's probably the opposite of the celebrity wearing this kind of clothing story, you actually have a really interesting story that's global. We've already talked about that. What do you think about the state of the fashion industry today?
Well, I want to continue with the story that I had started.
Okay.
And this is for the designers to be one day. So once you start off, you have a serious problem. What is going to be the cheapest fiber that you can buy? And what can you do to that fiber that you can sell it? So I chose the cheapest fiber at that time, which is 100% China silk for $2.65. So I thought to myself, what can I do with it? I can paint it, I can embroider it, and I can pleat it. So I started pleating China silk, and all the pleats went off because with 1 ounce of water, the pleat is gone. So I had to find a polyester satin back that was transparent, that I could pleat and it would be permanent forever. And I patented that Mari pleating, and that's how I started to make money. So then I was asked by various governments in the world to work in their factories to make the most beautiful embroideries in the world. And so the first government that asked me was India. And I have made 80 trips to India in 30 years. And I've had my factories in India, first in Mumbai, then in Delhi, and then in Srinagar and Lucknow. And so I became almost more Indian than I was American. And that happened that I went to Japan and to South Korea, South America, and that totally changed my life because I was just living all over the world. And so then I decided each collection should have a specific ancient tradition, whether it be Egypt in the time of Osiris, or Greece in the time of the classical period, 327 BCE. And so then I was able to see the world by thinking up a plan for each collection. And in that way, I had a really good time.
Well, you talk about your lines being inspired by ancient iconography, ancient style. So that probably, and the ancient histories of different cultures, that inspired you to create your lines. What inspires you, Stephen?
Well, every season, usually we start with fabrics. My first experience with anything that was in the clothing business was just going to my grandmother's house. She was a seamstress, and she used to have those, those butter cookie tins,
Yeah,
and they were filled with buttons. Yeah, and just like looking through all these buttons. But to me, like looking through fabric swatches is sort of the same thing. So we have all these fabric appointments. We don't know what we're going to do, but we know that we have to take these appointments, and then we just kind of like, it starts with like a big edit, and we just kind of like, okay, like that, don't like that, like that. And then you have all these fabrics, and then you kind of like, okay, well, what's kind of like, what's like a thread that kind of ties everything together? And
Yeah.
and so then that sort of happens, and then we kind of just sort of we put all the fabrics on a board, and then usually we talk, I have a woman's designer, a men's designer, a technical designer, assistant designers. So as a team, we kind of like figure out like, okay, and for what I do, it's a little bit different because unlike what Mary does, it's not so revolutionary from season to season. And probably because I'm not a trained designer, and the way that I've approached it has been to kind of like just refine. It's very much building on what we did last season, and like how can we make that better, and what can we add, and what can we take away. And so, and also because we do have other designers that we sell in the store, it's not the single thing, Where it changed a little bit was when we started doing presentations. And then once we started doing presentations, we realized, okay, we have to have like, 30 to 40 looks, and then, then you really need to start doing more things. So that's changed a bit.
Okay. I think we should open up the questions. And could you say, do we have another mic?
You can give her that one and
Yeah.
if you want to use this.
Oh, that's a great question. Okay, so Phyllis is asking the first question. Yeah. Well, hold on. Cool.
I just wanted you to follow up for the kids, how you changed with the times after obviously you were successful with Couturier, and then what you did before you stopped your designing, like going with QVC and having to find other kind of fabrics, etc., for business reasons.
Well, actually, QVC was a great deal of fun, and we could make rather extraordinary products, particularly in the jewelry area. I mean, we could do about 10 or 15. I'm also a jewelry designer, and I like that almost better than designing textiles. So we made each year maybe 5,000 different jewels. That's a lot of jewels, and we sourced them all over the world. And they were for QVC and for 2 lines of jewels that I had at the time. My one line, which was my private line, which was done in hand-forged brass, dipped in 22-karat gold, and usually hung on silken ropes. And the rest of these jewels were also highly involved in ancient civilizations. So we were making 10,000 different jewels a year. And then the other products that we developed were, of course, scarves. And the scarves were designed to go along, say we had an Egyptian collection based on the cult of Osiris. So we had all these Egyptian motifs. And so it went on like that from each civilizations. And they were all cheaper. I mean, you could buy on QVC a huge scarf every year for maybe $10. And then from that we made all kinds of lesser tops and bottoms that were selling for $10 and $15 and $20. And then we did also a huge number of embroideries. And usually ladies about 60 years old would buy them for their trips on these cruises they took at Christmas time. And so we made just almost like your sweater, but slightly different. And we sold thousands of these to these ladies who were taking cruises at Christmas time. And it went on like that.
So it's really interesting to be a designer and to be in business. You have to keep evolving. Mary and Stephen have 2 different approaches. It seems like Stephen every year evolves one step ahead, takes something that he has and makes it better every season, where Mary keeps on redefining herself and coming up with different styles, different lines, different products. So it's just 2 different approaches. Would you first say your name, and then you could ask a question to anybody?
I'm Tyler Noel. I'm from Sickerville, New Jersey. I guess I have 2 questions, but they're pretty much the same thing. I guess the first one would be, with 2 such cutthroat industries like art, like fashion, which is art, and I guess the corporate part of fashion, how do you find trust in people, and how do you sustain morality? And then the second one would be, I guess it's how do you maintain who you are / stay relevant in an industry that's so fast-paced and like you have to be on the top of your game all the time? How do you like?
I can answer that.
I have spent a lot of sleepless nights. You know, you get pushed in so many directions in a brutal cutthroat industry, and there's a lot of people that really don't care about ethics or having a moral compass, and you see those people succeed. I've seen a lot of things that I can't talk about that people should have been fired for, probably arrested for.
Come on, one story.
You know, well, I will say this, you know, there's always a trail of tears, and, you know, you always sort of know who's the cause of it. But those people are very street smart usually, and they make it very difficult to touch them. You know, I would like to think I'm not that person. God, it's you know, it's tough. It's you just have to know who you are and what you're willing to do and what you're not willing to do, and you know, I think that's character, that's backbone. It's a lot of like, you know, who your parents are and who your friends are and the choices that you make. Every industry is like this. It's not just fashion. You know, Wall Street is probably much worse. Lawyers are probably worse. You know, I mean, no matter where you go. I mean, we're politics. Look at the last election. You know, I mean, what we're talking about really is character. Hollywood. Oh yeah, no.
You have them both, fashion and Hollywood.
I know. Well, I knew I was in trouble when they wouldn't let me look in the mirror when they were doing my hair and makeup, and then there was a script that they wouldn't let me read before I went on set, and then it was like, oh, so this is how we're doing this. But anyway, to answer your question, I think it's all about the work. If you're committed to the work and you do the best and you work 200%, and dedicate yourself to it in its entirely, and you just avoid the pitfalls. People have good instincts. You can see who's causing trouble. You just don't go there. You just stay away from it. And there's enough talented people, like everyone sitting, here, and I hope that I operate this way, that we recognize hard work, smarts, talent, good effort. I mean, that's the people I'm hiring. I don't want somebody tricky on my team. I don't want an Eve Harrington. If you haven't watched All About Eve, you should watch that movie. So you don't have to play that game. Nobody has to play that game. And I think what I said earlier about the industry becoming more democratic, it's become a much nicer place to work. Actually, I mean, it used to be that people from competing magazines never even looked at each other, let alone say hello. And now, when certain people aren't in the room, we actually do.
Except for Vogue, maybe.
Yeah, I know. Well, that's what I was going to say. When certain people aren't in the room, we actually talk to each other now. But there's still a little bit of that left.
Great answer. Yeah, I mean, I worked in the movie business for 10 years, which is probably the most 15 years. Yeah, so you have to keep your sense of self and keep asking yourself, is this what I really want? Is this worth it to me? And am I going to deal with this person's shit forever? Pardon my French.
And you will get caught up. Somebody's going to bowl you over and play dirty tricks on you. That'll absolutely happen.
Yeah, because they know in a very glamorous, highly, hard to get job. You were saying how hard it was to get your job. That there's a line around the corner to take the. I mean, again, you saw Devil Wears Prada. I mean, that again, a documentary. But anyway, anybody? That's a great question.
Comment first and then a question.
Who are you? First.
I'm Steve Rosenthal. First, I might be a Luddite, but I think peeling pantyhose off a supermodel is a much sexier career than analysis of large data. But I was wondering if you guys in the industry, when you're thinking about growth, new markets, do you think about the substantial part of our population who think or believe that fashion gives them no pleasure? They hate to shop. If they do get dragged to a department store, they want to sit in the big brown leather chairs and watch a sports game. Or they might have a spouse that says, as you're leaving the house, you're not going outside dressed like that. Do you think about, and that's a huge part of the population, and perhaps an area of expansion, and you guys probably thought of it before I just did. Did you strategize and think, how do you sell fashion? How do you enlighten people to start getting a pleasure out of that? And
I think about that all the time. When I started at the Wall Street Journal, it was basically making a fashion and style magazine for, it's not the Elle audience. It's not the kind of fashion hungry and fashion committed. And I think it does all come down to pleasure and trying to show people who don't take pleasure in fashion, who don't take pleasure in shopping. I mean, I don't take pleasure in shopping. What is interesting about it, and that comes back to people's stories, to the difference that people are making, designers, in the way that they're ethically sourcing fabrics and having things made. There's business stories that are interesting. There's stories about the way men shop, and now there's online shopping, which is a sort of great thing for men, precisely because men don't get the same pleasure and thrill from going into a store and making a purchase the way women do. So we did a story on sort of two different online shopping resources for men, and there are two different approaches, and one was sort of very hand-holdy, and here's some tips for you, and the other was sort of just straight, here's the merch, you can buy it. And it's about finding one's way there, but it all does come back to pleasure. I mean, when you're talking about fashion and you're talking about anything that's not about sustenance and shelter, you're talking about things that are there to kind of enhance your life in a luxury way, and that to focus on the pleasure aspects of that, of getting dressed, of of having something beautiful. So it's also about talking about how things are made and the quality, so that when you buy something, you're appreciating it and not just kind of sticking something on your back. There's just ways of trying to reach. I think that's all our, as journalists, that's our job, to try and introduce what's interesting about these world. Our job is not to get you to buy things. I mean, essentially, we don't care. Stephen cares. But to show you, what's interesting about what Stephen makes and why it's different and why it might make you feel different.
But also,
differently.
Stephen, I mean, you're a huge believer in storytelling as well. Like, you have hired filmmakers, you've made short films, you've basically become a media company in a way to show your own work and the story behind it. How important is that today?
Even before we started making anything, for me, I'm just always fascinated with the story, even the story of the product. So, and the one thing that's unique about the store is that we have things for $50 and $3,000, and the edit isn't really about the price, it's really about the product. So if the product is special, it could be like some sneaker, like we had these French sneakers, they're like Converse, they're called Spring Court, and John Lennon wore them on the cover of the White Album, and it's just like a very niche little thing, but there's a story there. And then, whether if we're making something, it's, it could be the mill that's manufacturing the fabric for us. It might be this old Japanese mill, and they have the special loom, and that's a story. But communicating the story is definitely the challenging part. And now we're starting to more and more through our blog and things like that tell the stories, because it's really hard to do in a retail environment. And and we're telling stories, like you said, with little films. We've made, I don't know, 6 or 7 different short films, and they're fun. And it's fun also seeing them picked up on other sites,
Going viral,
Yeah.
like we just
Yeah.
discussed. Yeah, I mean, that's another job. I think we're going to wrap it up now, right? 'Cause there's oh. Okay, cool. And then I have one last question.
Hi, how are you? My name is Yami, and
Sorry.
I go to Convent of the Sacred Heart in Greenwich, Connecticut. And my question is, do you think you have found your calling? And if yes, how do you know? And if not, how are you working to find yourself in this industry?
Good luck.
I think it's interesting, the sort of the students here, because I certainly, as a student, never had any sense of, I would never have been at an event like this. And I think I had no idea what I wanted to do in terms of a career, no idea how to get there. And so what I sort of chose to do was, and I feel like, it goes back to your question, is you're always making a choice. At sort of every moment in your career and in your life, is this worth it? Do I want to give up a high-paying job because there's something I want to learn and go somewhere else where I won't get as well paid? Or is this a sort of toxic environment and I want to make a change? I think you have to always be open to that. And my feeling, and I don't know that it worked for me, was I was always just about what made me happy. I don't know what I want to be, and just following things that interested me. And for some reason, it all led up to a job now where I do think, I don't know if it's my calling, but I feel like it's the thing that I'm best at and happiest doing. And all the things that I did, studying photography and being a photo editor, writing about, doing all these different things, it all comes into play. And it wasn't until I was 40 that I thought, I better get serious about a career. Like, what do I want to do? And then sort of got ambitious. But I think it's a luxury to be able to say, I'm just going to, do what makes me happy. But it's also like lowering the bar for yourself a little bit of like, it means something to get out of school and just to be able to take care of yourself, to earn enough money to be on your own. And if you kind of lower the expectation bar, you're given kind of gifts of,
Yeah,
of
I mean,
more than you think you.
I think there's our savants, and I was not one either, because any day, again, any given day, I wanted to be a poet, a filmmaker, blah, blah, you know. But, and if you are that person, you know you are that person because you feel like you suffer from an obsessive compulsive disorder, and you know that you will die if you don't learn to become a pianist or a painter, or, you know. If you're not that person, I think that's the best advice, is like, just break it down to the day. I just got to do something that I enjoy, do something that I'm good at, and how can I do something to make myself happy today?
And that excites you, and you follow
And
your
that
interests.
excites you and inspires your imagination. I think that's key. Because I
And
think if you're
learning.
constantly learning, you'll be a happy person no matter what you do.
Okay, so I just want to bring it back to what you were saying initially is about how you got your job. Okay, so
Okay.
for everybody here who wants to be in the fashion industry or is curious about it, what is the one piece of advice that you would give to anybody here? We'll start with Steven, about getting a job in the fashion industry.
I think that it's, I mean, definitely interning is a huge thing, but even getting an internship obviously can be challenging. So I think it's kind of like, how do you make a connection with people in that company? And, you know, it could be, you know, a lot of times designers, because we represent about 20 designers, you know, in terms of getting them, you know, just having watched so many designers over the years and how they've sort of built their companies. And sometimes it's just, you know, you really, if there's talent there, if there's not talent there, then it's difficult. But if there's talent there, I feel like the system is open, you know, it's not as difficult, I find, you know, it's one store, getting it into that one store, and then from that one store, it's like sort of parlaying that and then having the perseverance to really keep with it, you know, and that's usually the thing that you see is, you know, people just giving up, and, you know, that would be the one thing that I would say.
Deborah?
I don't know how to answer that question.
Okay.
Okay, I'll go.
Go.
And then
Well, I'm just-
Mary.
I'm just going to expound on what you said. I think it's really important that you know important people, important celebrities, important people in the press, important store buyers, and they really, in the end, make your life, and they help you. And if you don't know those people and they're not behind you, it is really hard to build a big business.
We're going to hear from Ann, but I just want to tell you how I got my first job. I basically studied Variety magazine, which is like the trade newspaper for people in the entertainment industry. And I would highlight everybody who got a promotion, because I didn't have it in Hollywood either, and study what they did and where they worked. And in those days, I sent a fax, because it was 1997. And I faxed everybody. I'm like, you don't know me, but congratulations on your promotion.
Smart.
And flattered them. And
Yeah,
I got
flattery.
basically 25 meetings. I went out to LA. I had no idea what it was all about.
Smart.
And it went from like the Valley, Warner Brothers in the Valley, all the way to Sony in Culver City. I don't know if anybody's from Los Angeles, but it's like opposite. And then I got a job working as an assistant to somebody at Columbia Pictures and worked on Charlie's Angels
Yeah.
as my first job. So you definitely, like Mary was saying, like know who works in the industry and how the industry works. And that will really help you. And Ann?
Yeah. I mean, I think I got my job because I cut off, I can't believe I did this. I had a beautiful long dress of yours, and I turned it into a crotch grazing mini. And that got me noticed. But once I got in the door for my interview,
Show it off.
you know, I think, and Deborah would probably agree that this is important for us, know your history. You know, do due diligence, do your homework, show off. If you get an interview, you know, if you want to work in fashion, if you want to work in journalism, look at every magazine, you know, that Deborah did at WSJ, and look at what she's doing at T. Know what you like. Have some ideas about maybe, you know, what you think would be appropriate for it. You know, I mean, it might feel beyond your station to have that kind of a conversation, but be prepared to have that kind of conversation. There's nothing more frustrating for me when somebody who comes in and wants to say they want to be a journalist in fashion and they don't know who Mary McFadden is and they don't know what she was known for, or whatever, just know your history. And then the only other thing I would say that is the most important talent skill for any assistant I've ever hired is follow-up, and know what that means. Know how to follow up, because nothing will happen if you don't make it happen, and it won't happen unless you own it, and you can't own anything unless you know how to follow up, follow up, follow up. So that's like the number one skill set, I would say.
And not just through email.
Oh, no, please. I have two people who work next to each other that don't even know their phone extensions. And I'll ask them about something, from somebody who sits over there. And I send them an email. I'm like, pick up the phone.
Right.
Or get out of your seat and go ask them. I can't believe it. I don't know what to do.
No. I asked my assistant once, I'm like, did we get that meeting? No, the assistant didn't email me back. I'm like, pick up the effing phone. Those are the toxic people you don't want to work for. But anyway, let's thank our amazing panelists here. That was great.